It was the summer of 1996 when I first saw her again. Pinebrook hadn't changed. The old soda shop still blinked its neon pink sign every evening like it was stuck in time. The gas station on Main Street still smelled like burnt coffee and motor oil. And the wind still carried the same hush through the oak trees, whispering secrets it never told out loud. I had just turned 20 that June. My car, an old Ford with rusted mirrors and a missing radio knob, rattled as I pulled up to my parents' driveway after 2 years away at college. I wasn't supposed to come home until Christmas, but something in me, some strange, tired ache, made me pack my bags and drive the 8 hours back without telling anyone. Dad didn't say much, just nodded and asked if I wanted sweet tea. Mom cried a little and kissed my forehead like I was 12 again. And then there was Ellie. I didn't know she was still in Pinebrook, not until the next morning, when I walked into Clay's diner and heard the bell over the door ring. She was sitting in the booth by the window, the one where the sunlight hit the tabletop just right, soft and golden, like honey on old wood. She had a book in her hand and a coffee cup in front of her. She always drank it black, even back then. I froze. She looked up, and for a second, just 1 second, I swear I saw that old smile, the one that used to undo me. "Hey," she said, like it hadn't been 2 years and 100 mistakes since the last time we spoke. "Hey," I replied, too quiet, too unsure. She didn't invite me to sit, but she didn't look away either. Back in high school, Ellie was like gravity. You didn't choose to fall for her. You just did. We met sophomore year, both stuck in detention for reasons that probably didn't matter. She was all wild curls and chipped nail polish, reading dog-eared poetry books like they were secrets. I was the kid who tried too hard to seem like he wasn't trying at all. She used to say I thought too much. I used to say she felt too much. Maybe we were both right. By the time we were seniors, we were the kind of couple that made people roll their eyes. Always walking too close. Always laughing at something only we understood. But the truth is, we didn't understand ourselves at all. I sat down across from her before I could talk myself out of it. "You back for good?" she asked, not looking up from her book. "Just the summer, maybe longer." She nodded slowly, like the wind was turning in her chest and she was trying to decide whether to let it out. There was a small scar near her eyebrow. I hadn't seen that before. I wanted to ask about it, but didn't. "Not yet. Still read Sylvia Plath?" I asked. She smiled, that old half smile. "Sometimes. She makes more sense now." And just like that, we were two ghosts in a booth, haunted by a love that never really died, only learned how to stay quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan hummed like an old lullaby, and the crickets outside chirped in rhythm. Pinebrook had that kind of silence that wrapped around you, made your thoughts louder. I kept thinking about her. The way she held her coffee, the way she didn't flinch when she saw me, the way she said hey like it wasn't a word but a memory. Back then, I thought love was supposed to feel like fire. Explosive, passionate, all-consuming. But now, maybe love was more like that wind through the trees. Quiet, persistent, something that never left, even when you stopped listening for it. The next morning, I walked into the bookstore. Ellie was there behind the counter, sorting a box of new arrivals. She looked up. "Back again?" "Yeah," I said. "I was thinking about getting into reading." She raised an eyebrow. "Since when?" "Since you made it look like breathing." She didn't laugh, but she didn't ask me to leave either. And I knew even then that Pinebrook wasn't just my hometown anymore. It was the place where unfinished stories waited. And maybe, just maybe, where they finally got their endings. Ellie didn't ask why I was really back in Pinebrook, and I didn't offer. The thing about small towns is, even when people don't say things out loud, they say them in other ways. In the way their eyes linger a little longer than they used to. In how the man at the post office says welcome back, like he knows you're not just home for the weather. But Ellie didn't look at me like that. She looked at me like I was a book she'd already read and wasn't sure if she wanted to open again. Still, I kept showing up. At Clay's diner, at the bookstore, at the old hiking trail by the lake where we used to skip stones and argue about whether ducks had feelings. We didn't talk much about the past. Not yet, but it hovered between us like warm dust in sunlight, impossible to ignore. too delicate to touch. One evening, I walked into the bookstore and she wasn't behind the counter. Instead, the "back in 10 minutes" sign hung crookedly on the door. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Just when I was about to leave, I heard laughter from the back room. I hesitated, then knocked lightly on the door frame. She was there, sitting on the floor with her best friend, Casey. A record player spun something old and crackly in the corner. Fleetwood Mac, maybe, and they were surrounded by open boxes of old journals and letters. Casey looked up and smirked. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son." Ellie rolled her eyes. "Be nice." Casey grinned at me. "You staying this time or just haunting us again?" "I haven't decided yet. Honest," she said, then stood up and brushed past me, grabbing her keys off the shelf. "I'll leave you two to your ghosts." The door shut behind her with a soft click. I looked at Ellie. "You all right?" She was holding a notebook in her lap. One of those old black and white marbled kinds you get in middle school. Her thumb was resting on a page like she wasn't sure whether to turn it or tear it out. "Just found some things I thought I'd lost," she said. "Good things or bad things?" She looked up at me then. Not through me, at me. Things I didn't finish. We sat on the floor for a while, not saying much. Outside, the streetlights buzzed like fireflies trapped in jars. The town was quiet except for the occasional whoosh of a passing car. "I used to think we'd end up in California," she said after a while. I nodded. "You always talked about it." "I had it all planned out. I'd write poetry, sell it on street corners, and live off espresso and bad ideas." "You were going to be a mechanic, remember? Open your own garage." I smiled. "With the jukebox that only played Springsteen." "God, we were annoying," she laughed. I laughed too, but it caught in my throat. Some memories are soft like feathers, others cut like glass. This one did both. When I left for college, it wasn't because I didn't love her. It was because I did too much. I thought space would make it clearer. That time would help me breathe again. But all it did was teach me how to miss her in new ways. I wrote letters I never sent, bought postcards I never mailed, walked through new cities with her voice in my head like a radio playing a station that never quite came in clearly. But by the time I figured out I'd made a mistake, it felt too late. Back in the bookstore, Ellie stood up and offered me her hand. "Come on," she said. "I want to show you something." We stepped out into the night air. It was humid like most July nights in Pine Brook, but the breeze carried that soft coolness that hinted at rain. She led me behind the building, past the overgrown alley and a rusted bike rack, to a small wooden door I never noticed before. She pulled out a key from her pocket, unlocked it, and we stepped into a tiny room. Dust floated in the moonlight, filtering through the old window. There were art supplies on a desk, Polaroids pinned to a corkboard, a couch too small for anyone to lie on fully. "This used to be my dad's old office," she said. "When he died, the landlord let me keep it. I've been coming here ever since. It smelled like paint and lavender. This is where I write now," she added, "when I can't sleep." I looked around. It felt like stepping into her mind. Organized chaos, old poems taped to the wall, some with words crossed out angrily. A small stack of cassette tapes labeled in shaky handwriting. She sat on the couch and patted the spot beside her. "You still can't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not for long. The silence gets too loud." I knew what she meant. We talked until the sky turned the color of steel. Not about big things, just about books and music and why the fireflies didn't show up as much as they used to. And when I finally left, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I didn't want to be anywhere else. The next week passed like smoke in summer, slow, light, and gone before I knew it. I kept finding excuses to go back to the bookstore. Ellie never told me to leave, and I never stayed too long. It was a delicate balance, like walking across a frozen lake and pretending not to hear the cracks beneath your feet. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just existed in the same room. And sometimes she read aloud. Poems, notes she found in old books. Once, a receipt someone had scribbled a message on. "Tell her you love her before you're too late." She didn't say anything after that, just folded it and tucked it inside her journal. One evening, just before closing, she looked up from her register. "You remember the old train bridge?" she asked. "Of course. We used to sit on the edge and see who could spit farther. And you always cheated. I prefer creative angles. She shook her head, smiling softly. Meet me there tonight. After 10, I nodded, trying not to look as startled as I felt. It was the first time since I came home that she'd asked me to come to her. The train bridge sat just outside of town, past the orchard and the old field where the carnival used to set up every fall. By the time I got there, the sky had folded itself into navy blue. Crickets sang in soft choruses, and moonlight flickered across the rusted steel rails. Ellie was already there, sitting with her legs dangling over the side. She wore an old hoodie and jeans with rips at both knees, and she was barefoot, like always. I sat beside her without a word. We listened to the quiet for a long while. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full, like the pause in a song before your favorite line. I used to come here after we broke up, she said eventually. When I couldn't sleep, I'd just sit and count the lights in the valley. I didn't know. I didn't tell you. She turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, her eyes looked darker than usual, like storm clouds full of thoughts. I thought I hated you for a while, she said. You just left. I didn't know how to stay. That's not the same thing. I looked down at the water below. A single firefly hovered near my shoe. I was scared, I said. I thought I had to go figure out who I was, or I'd lose myself in us. Ellie exhaled through her nose, not quite laughing. And did you figure it out? No, I said. But I figured out that I didn't want to do it without you. She didn't say anything. The train bridge creaked a little in the wind, like it was listening. Finally, she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small cassette tape. She handed it to me. What's this? Songs we used to like, and a few you never listened to because you were too busy pretending you didn't like sad music. I laughed quietly. I still don't. You do now. She stood, brushed off her jeans. I'm leaving town in September, she said. I froze. Where? Don't know yet. Maybe New York. Maybe Oregon. I just know I have to. Why? She looked at me like it should have been obvious. Because if I stay, I'll forget how to dream. And I'm not ready to let that part of me go. After she left that night, I drove home with the cassette resting on the passenger's seat like it was alive. I didn't have a tape deck, but I held it anyway. Like it meant something. Like it was a map back to something I thought was lost. The next morning, I walked into the hardware store and bought an old stereo for $20. It smelled like dust and melted plastic, but it worked. I put the tape in. And for the first time in a long time, I let the music make me feel things I wasn't ready to say. The days that followed were quiet. Ellie and I talked more. Opened old drawers in each other gently one at a time. She told me about her dad's stroke, about the way she'd stopped writing for nearly a year after he died, about how she was afraid of becoming someone who only lived in memory. I told her about the panic attacks, the nights at school I'd sit in my car for hours, unable to move, about how I kept her letters under my mattress even though they stopped coming. She didn't cry, neither did I, but something between us softened, like a door slowly creaking open. One night I walked her home. The stars were out, clear and quiet. When we reached her porch, she didn't go in right away. Instead, she sat on the steps, pulling her knees to her chest. Did you ever think we'd end up here again? She asked. Not like this. She nodded slowly. I'm scared, she said. Of what? That this is just a rerun. That we'll make the same mistakes. That we'll say all the right things too late again. I took a breath, slow and deep. What if we just start fresh? No pressure, no plans, just coffee and bridge and cassette tapes. She looked at me, and this time she didn't look away. Okay, she whispered. But if you run again, don't come back. I won't run, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. Pinebrook didn't have much, but it had the Green Door Cafe. It was wedged between the laundromat and a shoe repair shop that hadn't actually repaired shoes in 5 years. The paint on the cafe door had peeled in long curls, but the bell still jingled when you walked in, and the owner still wrote poems on the chalkboard menu. Ellie and I started meeting there in the mornings. Not every day, not always on purpose, but enough that the barista started remembering our orders. Her black coffee, my overly sweet vanilla latte that she always teased me about. Sometimes we brought books. Sometimes she doodled on napkins. Sometimes we sat in silence, just watching the world go by outside the window like it was someone else's movie. It was the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and old records, and it became ours. One morning, she looked at me over her coffee cup and said, "Did you ever think we'd just grow old here?" I raised an eyebrow. "You said you were leaving in September." "I am," she said, "but I still think about it sometimes. What it would be like to stay, open a shop, walk to work, complain about the weather. You'd go crazy." "Probably," and she smiled. "But sometimes crazy sounds safe." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream. I used to think staying meant giving up. Now I think it might just mean choosing something. "What would you choose?" I looked at her, really looked. "You, maybe." She blinked, looked down at the table, then back up. "You can't say that unless you mean it." "I do." "Then you shouldn't say it," she whispered. After that, we didn't talk much for a few days. We saw each other at the bookstore, at the diner, but there was something fragile between us, like a thread pulled too tight, waiting to snap. I didn't push her. I just kept showing up. Sometimes, that's the only way to say you're sorry without saying anything at all. One night in mid-August, the town held its annual summer lantern walk. It was mostly for kids, paper lanterns lit with battery candles, strung along the riverbank while folk music played in the park. Ellie and I hadn't been since high school, but that night we both ended up there anyway. She found me near the water, where the trees hung low and the lights reflected like stars on the surface. "You came," she said. "So did you." She held up a lantern she'd made, blue with yellow stars painted across it. A little crooked, a little messy, like everything worth loving. "I didn't plan to," she said. "Me either." We started walking. Slow steps, soft words. "I was scared," she said finally, "of how easy it was getting again. With you." "I know. It's like no time passed. Like you could just walk back into my life and pick up the parts I left behind." "I don't want to pick up the past," I said. "I just want to carry something forward with you." She was quiet for a while. Then she stopped walking and looked at me. "You still listen to that tape?" "Every day." "Even the sad songs?" "Especially the sad ones." She smiled. "Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that reached her eyes and lit up everything inside them." Then without a word, she took my hand. We didn't call it getting back together. We didn't call it anything at all. We just started living again, sitting on her porch, reading out loud, riding our bikes down the hills behind the orchard, trying every milkshake flavor at Clay's like we were 12 again. There were no promises, just presence. And in a way, that felt more real than anything we ever had before. Late one night, we lay on the roof of her tiny writing room. The stars stretched out in a velvet sky. The town was quiet. Even the wind had fallen asleep. "I'm scared of leaving," she said. "I thought you had to." "I do, but it doesn't feel as simple now." "Because of me? Because of this?" She reached over and touched my chest just lightly, like she was trying to memorize the shape of something that might not be there tomorrow. "I don't want to lose myself," she whispered. "You won't," I said. "And if you ever start to, I'll remind you who you are." She didn't speak after that. She just lay there, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm with the night. And I knew deep in my bones that whatever happened in September, we'd never go back to being strangers again. On the first day of September, a coolness crept into the mornings. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but you could feel it in the air, that soft shift between seasons, like the town was quietly getting ready to let go of summer. Ellie didn't mention her plan to leave again, and I didn't bring it up. Instead, we slipped into a quiet routine. Coffee, bookstores, long walks, old songs. We let each day arrive without asking too much from the next. But something was building beneath the silence. A question neither of us knew how to ask without breaking the fragile peace between us. One afternoon, I stopped by her writing room when she wasn't expecting me. The door was open. The radio was playing something low and crackling. The air smelled like ink and chamomile. She was sitting at the desk, her back to me, writing in a notebook I hadn't seen before. The pages were worn at the edges, thick with something that looked more like memory than ink. She didn't hear me come in. I almost turned to leave, but she looked over her shoulder just before I stepped away. "You ever write letters you don't send?" she asked without surprise. "Too many." She held up her notebook. "I started this the week after you left. One letter for every day I missed you." I stayed still. I thought if I could write it all down, I'd get over you faster. But it didn't work. "I just learned how to miss you better." She closed the notebook gently, like it was made of something breakable. "I don't want to keep writing letters to ghosts," she said. "Then don't," I said. "Write one to me, while I'm still here." She looked at me, something soft breaking in her expression. "I don't know how it ends yet." "That's okay," I said. "Maybe we write it together." Later that evening, she read me one of the letters. It was short, just a page, but I felt every word like wind against my skin. "Dear you, I saw a couple today that looked like us." She was laughing at something he said, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the road. "I hope if you're ever with someone else, you still look at them when they laugh. Because that's the part that matters. That's the part that's real." She didn't ask what I thought, and I didn't try to answer. We just sat in the hush of the room, letting the letters settle into the air around us like dust that had always been there. That weekend, Pinebrook held its annual harvest fair. It was one of those small-town things people pretend to be annoyed by, but secretly love. The pumpkin weigh-in, the pie contests, the string lights over Main Street that made everything feel like a movie. Ellie and I went together, but we didn't call it a date. We walked hand in hand anyway. We played the ring toss badly, ate kettle corn. She convinced me to dance in the middle of the street when the band played something old and twangy. It felt like falling into something I thought I'd lost forever. It felt like being 19 again, but safer, quieter, realer. Afterward, we sat in the back of my truck, watching the stars blink above the trees. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I almost stayed," she said. "Almost?" "I got the acceptance letter yesterday for the writing program in Oregon." My heart did something strange, like it wanted to panic but couldn't quite remember how. "That's amazing," I said, because it was. "I haven't said yes yet." "Why not?" "Because part of me thinks if I leave, I'll lose this." She turned to look at me. "You." I reached for her hand, held it like something sacred. "You won't lose me," I said, "but I don't want to be what holds you back." "You're not," she whispered. "You're what I want to run toward. That's what scares me." We sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "If I go, will you wait?" I thought about it, about the years I spent chasing things that didn't matter, about the way her voice sounded when she read aloud, about all the letters we never sent, and all the mornings we hadn't had yet. "I won't wait," I said. "I'll be here." "That's not waiting. That's choosing." She nodded slowly, and for the first time, her eyes didn't look like storm clouds anymore. They looked like morning. The first week of September brought the scent of rain and sharpened pencils. Kids returned to school in oversized sweaters. Leaves began to yellow at the edges. The cicadas didn't hum quite as loud anymore. And in Pinebrook, it felt like the world had started to hold its breath. Ellie got quiet too. Not distant, just softer, as if she were trying to memorize everything before she let go. She still came to the coffee shop, still let me walk her home, still kissed me goodbye on the porch like it might be the last time. I never asked when she was leaving, and she never told me. Some things we protect by not putting them into words. One afternoon, I found her in the bookstore's back room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open boxes and stacks of old notebooks. She was sorting, but not really, just touching old things like they meant something. I leaned against the doorframe. "You packing already?" "Organizing," she said, then sighed, which is just a slower version of saying goodbye. I sat beside her. She held up a Polaroid, us from high school, me in a dumb flannel, her in one of my old jackets. Both of us laughing at something we couldn't remember now. "Casey took this," she said, "the night we skipped prom and went to the lake instead." I still have the mixed CD from that night. She looked over, smiling faintly. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we hadn't messed it up the first time?" All the time, I said. But maybe, she added, we had to break a little to fit better now. That night, it rained. Not a storm, just a long, steady fall that made the whole town feel like it was under a blanket. We sat on her porch, wrapped in a quilt, listening to it. No words, just the sound of water and heartbeats. She leaned against me, and I felt the tension in her body ease, like she was letting go of something invisible. I got the train ticket, she whispered. My breath caught. For when? Tuesday morning. I nodded slowly. That's 3 days. She turned toward me. Will you come to the station? Of course, I said. Even if I have to stand there pretending it's not happening. She smiled, and her fingers found mine under the blanket. You're braver than you used to be. No, I said. I just have more to lose now. The next 2 days were made of little goodbyes. She gave away books she didn't want to carry, returned borrowed records to old friends, wrote letters she sealed but didn't address. I helped her carry boxes, drove her to the post office, sat quietly while she took long pauses between memories. At night, we stayed up late talking about nothing, just to stretch time. We didn't talk about the future, not mine, not hers, just now. Only now. On Monday night, her last night in Pine Brook, we went to the lake, the one where we first kissed. We spread out a blanket and brought a little lantern in the old stereo I bought for her tape. She pressed play. Fleetwood Mac, again. Landslide. We didn't speak until it finished. Then she turned toward me, legs tucked under her, eyes full of that storm and sunshine mix I knew too well. If I stay, she said quietly, will you ever forgive me for not chasing the rest of my story? If you go, I replied, will you forgive me for staying behind? She reached over and touched my face. Just one hand, gentle like a memory being handled carefully. We could make it work. I know. But maybe we're meant to want this more than we're meant to have it. I shook my head. No, I said. We have it. It's just not all in one place. She leaned in. And that night, we kissed like a promise we weren't ready to break. Tuesday morning, the train station sat quiet under a low ski. Ellie stood with one small suitcase in a denim jacket. Her hair was pulled back, but a few curls had escaped and danced in the breeze. I stood beside her, holding nothing but the ache in my chest. You okay? I asked. No, she smiled. But I will be. The speaker crackled with the arrival announcement. I looked at her, and she looked at me like she was still memorizing everything. All right, she said. Send me the sad ones. They're all gonna be sad ones. I nodded. The train rolled in, loud and heavy. She kissed me once, just once, and then stepped back. I love you, she said. I didn't answer, not because I didn't feel it, but because she already knew. And some words are meant to stay in the air, unanswered, so they can echo longer. She stepped onto the train, and just like that, she was gone. The wind rushed in behind her like it needed to fill the space she left. And I stood there, watching the tracks, until there was nothing left to see but sky. The day after she left, Pine Brook felt unfamiliar. Same streets, same sky, same rhythm. But without Ellie, everything moved a little slower, a little heavier, like the town was carrying something it didn't know how to put down. I went to the coffee shop, but didn't order anything. Just sat at our usual table and stared at the chalkboard. The barista, Jordan, brought over a cup of black coffee without asking. She left? He asked gently. I nodded. He didn't say anything else, just gave me a soft pat on the shoulder and walked away. That was the thing about small towns. They didn't need the full story. They just felt the holes. Back home, I cleaned in my room. Not because it was messy, but because it was full of her. The tape still sat in the stereo. I didn't play it. Not yet. Her handwriting was still on a note beside my bed. Something simple like, don't forget to breathe today. I folded it up and slid it into my wallet. Some things you carry without thinking. The writing room behind the bookstore was locked. I stood outside for a long time, staring at the little window where sunlight used to fall across her notebooks. Casey found me there. She asked me to hold on to the key, she said. I nodded. Want to go in? I hesitated. Is it weird if I say no? Not at all. We sat on the curb instead, sharing a warm cinnamon roll from the diner. "She'll write, Casey said. "Maybe not right away, but she will. I'm not worried about letters." "What then?" "That I'll forget how her voice sounded when she read them." Casey nudged me with her shoulder. "You won't." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if I believed her yet. The first letter came 2 weeks later. It wasn't long. "It's colder here than I thought. The apartment is small, but I like it. The windows creak when it rains, which makes it feel like a story waiting to be told. I saw someone with your walk the other day and almost cried. I bought a new notebook. Haven't written in it yet, but I will. I promise." I read it 3 times, then placed it under my pillow like it could protect my dreams. I started going to the lake again. Alone most days. Sometimes I'd bring a book and never open it. Sometimes I'd just skip stones until my shoulder hurt. Once I found a smooth rock with blue marker on it. Breathe. I kept it in my coat pocket. Ellie would have liked that. I didn't write back right away. I didn't know how. What do you say to someone who took your heart with them and asked you to hold space anyway? Eventually I did. "Dear E, the trees are turning. The ones near the bridge went gold first. I keep expecting to see you there sitting with your feet over the edge. I still play the tape. Side B skips in the middle of that song you hate. I don't fix it. I just let it play through. I'm okay. Most days. The rest I let pass quietly. Come home when you're ready. Not because I need you to, just because I'll always leave the porch light on." Me. I mailed it. No return address. She'd know where to find me. Over the next few weeks, the letters continued. Sometimes once a week, sometimes less. She never said whether she missed me. Not exactly. But it was in the lines between grocery lists and late-night thoughts. In the way she described the smell of rain or how quiet her apartment got after midnight. She was writing again. That much was clear. And somehow, that made the space between us feel a little less wide. One night in October, I sat on her old porch with Casey. We drank cider from paper cups and watched the wind tug at the last leaves on the maple tree out front. "She said anything about coming back?" Casey asked. I shook my head. "Do you think she will?" "I don't know." Casey sighed. "I think she left to become who she always was. Not to escape. I know. Maybe she just needed to believe she could become that without you." I looked at her. "Do you think she still loves me?" Casey smiled gently. "You don't write someone that often unless your heart still fits their name." That night, I played the tape again. Let it skip. Let it echo. And for the first time since she left, I didn't cry. I just listened and imagined her doing the same. By mid-October, Pinebrook was all flannel and fog. The town felt slower, wrapped in warm colors, maple reds, burnt orange, golden yellow. The wind smelled like smoke and apples, and people started lighting their fireplaces again. I spent most mornings walking through the orchard trails behind the library. No real reason, just routine, just rhythm. There's something about fallen leaves that made it easier to think. Ellie's letters shifted too. They started coming every other week. Not shorter, not colder, just different. Like she was settling in, building something. The last one came folded in half, sealed with a bit of black ink on the corner. A smudge of something personal. "Dear you, I had a dream that we were old and living in a cabin where everything smelled like cedar. You were trying to make pancakes but burning them, and I was laughing and stealing the spatula from your hand. We didn't talk much in the dream, but it felt full. Like we'd said all the important things already. I think about that a lot lately, how love doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just has to stay." I read it while sitting in my truck outside the train station, the same place I last saw her. The platform was empty now, covered in a thin quilt of leaves. And I felt it, that ache, that deep, warm, impossible ache of wanting someone to walk back through a door they had every right to leave. I didn't write back right away. I went to the lake instead, watched the fog lift slowly off the water. I threw a stone, then another, then sat down and finally spoke out loud, as if she could hear me across the country. "I don't want to move on," I whispered. "I just want to keep moving, with you in it, somewhere." That night, I found her old tape in the stereo again. I hadn't flipped it to side B since she left. Not because I couldn't, because I wasn't ready, but I was now. So I pressed play. There it was. That soft acoustic song, she said, reminded her of the way the air smelled after rain. It skipped, just like before. But I let it play anyway, because love isn't perfect. It stutters. It catches. But if it keeps playing, that's what matters. In town, the bookstore stayed quiet. Casey let me sit in the back sometimes, just to read or write or exist in the spaces Ellie used to fill. She left behind a few notebooks. Not many words in them, mostly phrases, snippets, lines from poems that hadn't formed yet. One page just said, "Not every return means a full circle. Some are just pauses in the right direction." I copied that line and stuck it above my desk at home. I stared at it a lot, let it mean what it needed to mean. By Halloween, Pinebrook started pulling into itself. Kids in costumes, paper ghosts taped to storefronts. I passed the train station again, and this time didn't stop. Didn't stare. Didn't wait. I just walked. Because sometimes not waiting is the bravest thing you can do. And then just like that, winter whispered in. The orchard trees went bare. The lake froze around the edges. And her letters stopped. At first, I thought maybe they got lost. Mail was slow. Holidays were coming, but by December I knew. It wasn't an accident. She was gone. Not in the cruel way. Not in the forever way. Just in the way that people go when they need to keep becoming themselves. And I didn't blame her, but I still missed her. Everywhere. The last page in her notebook, the one she left behind, was dated the day before she boarded the train. One line, tiny in the corner. Don't forget how much it mattered. I haven't. I won't. January came slow and silver. Pinebrook wore frost like a delicate shawl, and the sun slipped behind clouds before noon. The town felt asleep in winter's hush. I had fallen into a quiet rhythm, work at the coffee shop, walks by the frozen lake, evenings by the fire with Casey and her stories. But something was different, something just beneath the surface, like a soft pulse waiting to be noticed. It came in the mail, a small envelope, cream-colored and unmarked, slipped through the slot in my door. No return address, no stamp. I stared at it, heart pounding, hands trembling just enough to make the edges blur. Inside, a folded note. In Ellie's handwriting, "Dear you." I didn't forget. I just needed to find my voice again. It's been quiet here, too quiet. I'm learning that love doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's the small flame that keeps the dark away. There's a story I'm writing for you, not the one we started. Something new, something softer. I don't know when I'll finish it, but I wanted you to know you're still part of it. I read the note over and over until the words folded into me. Casey found me holding the letter in the coffee shop the next day. "You got mail from the ghost," she said softly. I looked up, blinking. Not a ghost. "Whatever she is," Casey smiled, "she's still here." That night, I sat by the lake, holding the note like it was a lifeline. I traced the words with my finger, feeling the weight of hope, and something else, a new beginning. The snow began to fall quietly outside my window, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. The frost had settled hard by the time I got Ellie's letter. It was the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like little clouds, and your fingers go numb before you even realize it. Pinebrook in January looked like it had paused, holding its breath beneath a thick white blanket. For days, I carried that letter in my coat pocket. It was folded small but heavy with everything she left unsaid and everything she was starting to say again. The note wasn't just a message. It was an invitation, an opening. I wanted to read it somewhere quiet, somewhere that felt like us. So I walked to the bookstore, the one where she had spent so many afternoons lost in the pages of novels and notebooks filled with half-finished poems. The bell above the door jingled softly when I pushed it open, and Jordan looked up from behind the counter, eyebrows raised. "Back so soon?" he asked. I shrugged, smiling a little. Needed to see it again. Needed to be where she was. Jordan nodded, understanding more than I said. I found a corner by the window, where the winter light spilled in pale and thin. Sitting down, I unfolded the letter once more, letting the words settle like a warm coat around me. Dear you, I didn't forget. I just needed to find my voice again. It's been quiet here, too quiet. I'm learning that love doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's the small flame that keeps the dark away. There's a story I'm writing for you, not the one we started. Something new, something softer. I don't know when I'll finish it, but I wanted you to know you're still part of it. Each sentence felt like a step forward, a bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank. I thought about all the moments that had passed since she left. The silence, the waiting, the letters that stopped and started again. It was like watching a flame flicker in the wind, sometimes almost out, but always finding a way to glow. The words sparked something inside me. A quiet hope, not a blazing fire, but steady warmth. That afternoon, I wandered through Pine Brook like a ghost tethered to memory. The orchard paths were lined with brittle branches and patches of ice. The lake was mostly frozen, but I could see the water still moving beneath a thin crust. I found the spot where Ellie and I used to sit, the worn bench near the water's edge, covered in frost. I sat down and pulled the letter out again. The wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying the faint scent of cedarwood from the distant cabins. I closed my eyes and imagined her there beside me, fingers brushing mine, voice soft as a lullaby. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, like I was no longer holding onto the past, but letting it carry me somewhere new. Over the next few weeks, life in Pine Brew settled into its slow winter rhythm. Work at the coffee shop kept me busy enough to distract, but not enough to forget. Casey checked in often, bringing stories and laughter like little gifts to break the cold. One night, she pulled me aside after closing. "You look like you're carrying something light and heavy at the same time," she said. I smiled. "That's a pretty good way to put it." She nodded knowingly. "You're holding on to hope, but also the fear it might slip away." Exactly. She gave me a quiet squeeze on the shoulder. "You deserve to hold both. Just don't forget to let one go when it's too much." Ellie's next letter came not long after. This time with a poem folded inside. It was raw and simple, full of pauses and half-formed ideas, like a sketch of a feeling she was still trying to understand. Between the lines, "I find you waiting, a whisper caught in the snow, soft and slow, a flicker in the dark." The words made me smile with tears. Because love wasn't perfect. It was messy and quiet, and sometimes it was just waiting, patient and hopeful between the lines. Winter stretched on, and with it came the slow thaw of days growing longer. I started writing again too. Not letters, not stories for anyone else, just pieces of myself on paper, raw and unfinished. Sometimes I read them out loud in the bookstore's back room, where the dust motes floated like tiny stars in the pale afternoon light. And sometimes I imagined Ellie there, listening. One evening, just as the sun was setting behind the hills, Casey and I walked by the lake. The air was crisp, and the world held that fragile golden light that only happens just before night falls. "I think she's still writing," I said. Casey smiled. "I think you are too." We stopped by the frozen water's edge. "Maybe," she said softly, "some stories don't have endings, just chapters waiting to be written." I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were starting to shine, and I believed her. The weeks after that note from Ellie became a quiet rhythm of waiting and writing, of small moments stretching wide like the pale winter sky over Pine Brook. There's something strange about winter, how it presses time flat, and every breath feels heavier and slower, like the world itself is leaning in closer to listen. I'd find myself sitting at the diner after work, staring out the fogged-up window as the cold crept around the edges of the glass. The bell above the door jingled every time someone came in or out, but I felt separated, like I was watching life from the other side of a pane, waiting for the warmth to come back inside. Ellie's letters were steady now, like slow embers glowing in the dark. Not blazing, not burning out, just holding a space between us that was fragile and strong all at once. One evening, I sat at the bookstore's back room, a small notebook open in front of me. The pages were half full with scribbles, fragments of poems, lines of things I didn't know how to say out loud. Casey was there too, sitting cross-legged on the floor, painting her latest watercolors, gentle blues and greens swirling on the paper. "Your words sound like music," she said without looking up. I smiled, hesitant. "Maybe because they're about waiting." She nodded. "Waiting is a song all its own. Slow, patient, sometimes hopeful, sometimes aching." I looked out the window, watching a few late leaves cling stubbornly to the branches. "That's how it feels," I said quietly. "Like waiting for a fire to catch, but not knowing if the spark's strong enough." Casey finally looked up, her eyes shining in the low light. "The spark's there. You just have to give it time." Some nights, I played the tape Ellie left behind again. Side B, the soft acoustic song she said reminded her of rain. The skipping part that never got fixed. The way her voice cracked just slightly at the end of every line, like she was holding back more than she was saying. I'd close my eyes and pretend she was sitting across from me in that little room behind the bookstore, telling me stories in that quiet way that made everything else stop. Winter began to fold into early spring. The frost melted slowly, revealing grass that was still pale but alive. The orchard started to hum again with birds' song, tentative and shy. One afternoon, I walked past the lake and found a small bundle wrapped in brown paper on the bench where Ellie and I used to sit. I unwrapped it carefully and found a book of poetry with a note tucked inside. "For you," it said, "to hold on to when the world feels too big." I flipped through those pages. Some lines circled, others underlined in pencil. It was a quiet way of saying she was still here. Still reaching, still writing. Casey found me at the diner that night, reading the book like it was the last piece of warmth I needed. "You think she's coming back?" she asked softly. I looked up, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I don't know, but I think she's still here. Maybe that's enough." Casey smiled and we shared a silence that said more than words could. Ellie's letters came less often now, but each one was longer, filled with small stories about her days, the people she met, the places she saw. She talked about the cafe she worked at in the city, the friends she made who reminded her of home, and the notebooks she filled with half-formed dreams. Sometimes she included sketches, little drawings of windows, trees, and hands reaching out. One letter stood out. It was different, more hopeful, more sure. "Dear you, I'm learning how to carry two homes in my heart, the one I'm in now and the one waiting for me back in Pine Brook. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes I feel torn, but I'm starting to believe that maybe love isn't about choosing one place or the other. Maybe it's about holding both. Thank you for waiting." Spring crept slowly into town, bringing with it longer days and warmer nights. The ice on the lake melted completely. The orchard burst into bloom, delicate white flowers shading into pink. I started writing letters back to her, not just poems or fragments, but whole pages of stories and memories in little moments. One afternoon, Casey and I sat by the lake again. "The way you write her makes it feel like she's right here," she said. I shrugged. "She is, just somewhere else for now." Casey nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe some distances aren't meant to separate, just stretch us." And so we lived in that space between words and silences, between absence and presence, holding on to the soft fires that kept us warm through the longest nights. The thaw was slow and hesitant. Pine Brook, waking from winter's long sleep, stretched itself awake in gentle bursts, snowdrops pushing through frozen soil, the first shy crocuses, the warm smell of earth coming back to life. I found myself spending more time at the edge of the lake, where water and ice met in delicate shifting lines. It was a border between stillness and movement, just like everything felt inside me, between waiting and going forward, holding on and letting go. Ellie's letters were fewer now, but every word she sent felt like a hand reaching across the miles. In one of her last letters before spring fully bloomed, she wrote, "There are echoes in the quiet, things left unsaid, feelings folded into the spaces between words." I think love lives there sometimes too. Those words stayed with me for days, like a gentle hum beneath everything. The days grew warmer, and the orchard woke with blossoms, soft and fragrant. The air was filled with the buzz of bees and the occasional flutter of wings. It felt like the world was promising something new. Casey and I started spending evenings at the old pier, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun dip behind the hills. One night, she handed me a small notebook, her own, filled with sketches and half-written stories. "Thought you might want to add to this," she said with a smile. I took it carefully, the pages rough and warm under my fingers. Together, we wrote stories of friendship and love, of waiting and moving on, scribbled in the margins and between the lines. It felt like a new kind of conversation, one without words spoken aloud but full of meaning. Meanwhile, the town prepared for the Spring Festival, a yearly tradition that brought everyone out of their winter cocoons. I volunteered to help set up, unpacking boxes of decorations and stringing lights with Casey and a few others. The festival was a bright patch of joy against the quiet world, a reminder that even after the longest winters, life finds a way to shine. Ellie's absence was still there, a hollow note beneath the laughter, but it wasn't the only thing I felt. One afternoon, walking through the orchard paths, I stumbled upon a familiar face. It was Rachel, the girl who'd been one of Ellie's closest friends before she left. Her smile was tentative but warm. We talked for a while, sharing memories of Ellie, of the days before the distance stretched between us all. She told me stories I hadn't heard before, moments of Ellie's laughter, her small acts of kindness, the way she used to dream with wild eyes. It felt like finding another piece of the puzzle, a way to keep Ellie close even when she was far away. That night at the bookstore, I found a letter slipped on under the door. No signature, just a simple note. Some stories don't end. They echo. My heart jumped. Was it from Ellie? From Rachel? Or someone else? I didn't know. But I kept the note, folded in my pocket like a secret warmth. Spring rolled deeper into the days, and with it came a sense of quiet change. Ellie's letters began to carry hints of plans, ideas of visits, questions about old friends, sketches of new dreams. She was coming back. Not with fireworks, not with promises, but with the soft certainty of a story still unfolding. As the festival lights twinkled overhead and the town danced beneath the stars, I realized something. Love isn't always about being together. Sometimes it's about holding the space for someone to find their way back when they're ready. And sometimes it's about finding your own way forward while you wait. Spring in Pinebrook was a slow awakening. The days grew longer, pulling the frost away like a faded curtain. The orchard blossomed with delicate petals that drifted on the breeze like confetti, soft and white. I spent most afternoons wandering the familiar paths, letting the fresh air fill the spaces winter had hollowed out. Ellie's letters arrived more steadily now, each one a whisper, soft as the new leaves unfolding, carrying small stories of city streets, morning coffees, and quiet dreams. One afternoon, I sat by the lake's edge, reading her words beneath a sky that was just starting to brush itself with pale pink. She wrote about the cafe where she worked, a little place filled with the smell of cinnamon and old books. She told me about the barista who always got her name wrong and the playlist they played on rainy days. The mundane details made her feel closer, more real, like she was just a heartbeat away rather than miles. Casey and I spent evenings on the pier, wrapped in blankets, sharing stories and sometimes silence. One night, she said softly, "You're holding on to her, but you're also holding on to yourself." That's the hardest part. I nodded, staring out at the shimmering water. I'm learning that love isn't about possession. It's about presence. She smiled, eyes reflecting the stars just beginning to appear. You're growing. The town buzzed softly with preparations for the spring festival. Lights twinkled on trees, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. Helping Casey hang lanterns one evening, I felt a quiet thrill. This was the kind of warmth we'd been waiting for all winter. Ellie's next letter came with a small sketch, a window with sunlight pouring through, casting long shadows on a wooden floor. "I'm coming home soon," she wrote. "Not because I've figured everything out, but because I'm ready to try again." The days that followed were filled with anticipation and the gentle hum of possibility. I found myself writing longer letters back, filling pages with stories about Pinebrook, the people, the places, the moments I wanted her to see again. One evening after closing the bookstore, Jordan and I talked about the future. "I think some stories are meant to be slow," he said, stacking books on a shelf. "Like a good novel that unfolds with patience." I smiled. "Yeah, the kind you don't want to end." When Ellie finally returned, it was a quiet afternoon, soft with spring light. She stepped off the bus with a tired smile, her eyes searching for the familiar. I was waiting by the station, heart thundering. She looked at me, and for a moment time folded. No grand declarations, no rushing, just two people standing in the same space, breathing the same air. We walked slowly through town, talking about everything and nothing. The orchard was blooming, and the world smelled like hope. That night, we sat by the lake, wrapped in blankets, and shared stories beneath the stars. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. The morning Ellie came back to Pine Brook, the world felt like it was holding its breath. The sun spilled golden across the orchard, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers and fresh earth. We didn't rush. We moved through the day slowly, like we were learning each other's rhythm again. There was an awkwardness, yes, the kind that comes from time and distance, but beneath it was something tender, soft, like the first light of dawn brushing across a quiet town. We sat by the lake, the water smooth and reflective like a mirror. Ellie pulled her coat tighter around her, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I miss this," she said quietly. I nodded. "I missed you." The days that followed were a delicate dance of rediscovery. We walked the orchard paths, fingers brushing, sharing stories and laughter that felt new and familiar all at once. There were moments of silence too, comfortable and full of meaning. One afternoon, Ellie showed me the notebook she'd been keeping on her trip. Pages filled with poems, sketches, and little notes. She read me one. "The softest light is the one that waits for dawn, a gentle promise in the quiet dark." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Life in Pine Brook started to feel like a warm song, slow and steady. We went to the spring festival together, surrounded by twinkling lights and the hum of community. Casey was there, her smile bright and welcoming. We laughed, danced under the stars, and for a moment, the past felt far away. At night, we sat by the fire in my living room. No grand speeches, no dramatic moments, just the simple comfort of being near. Ellie traced patterns on my palm with her finger, and I felt the steady beat of her heart. It was enough. One day, we walked to the hill overlooking Pine Brook. The view stretched wide, rooftops, trees, the winding river sparkling in the sun. Ellie took a deep breath. "I'm scared," she said. I squeezed her hand gently. "It's okay. We don't have to have it all figured out," she said. "Maybe we just have to keep trying," I answered. She smiled, eyes shining. Spring turned to summer slowly but surely. With it came new routines and new challenges. We learned to navigate the spaces between us, the fears, the hopes, the quiet moments that made up the fabric of our days. There were still rough patches, but they didn't feel so scary anymore, because we were facing them together. The soft light of evening wrapped around us one night as we sat by the lake. Ellie rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt the warmth spread through me like a gentle fire. It was a quiet love, patient, steady, real. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, we had this. The summer sun hung low over Pine Brook, casting long shadows through the orchard's leafy canopy. The scent of ripe apples mingled with the warm earth, and the days stretched lazily like a slow, steady song. Ellie and I had settled into a rhythm that felt fragile but true. We were learning to speak again, to share the small things, a touch, a glance, a quiet laugh, moments that built the bridge between us. The past hadn't disappeared. It was there, like the shadows beneath the trees, reminding us of the distance we'd crossed and the wounds we carried. But so was hope, a light filtering softly through the leaves, promising something new. One evening, Casey invited us to a small gathering by the river. The group was a mix of old friends and new faces, laughter and music weaving through the air like smoke from a fire. We sat on blankets, the stars blinking awake above us, and for a while the world felt infinite. Ellie pulled me close. her head resting on my shoulder. "We're here," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "here and now." That night, walking home through the quiet streets, we talked about everything and nothing. The fears that still lingered, the dreams we dared to dream, the silence between words that sometimes said more than any sentence could. As summer deepened, the orchard became our sanctuary. We spent afternoons beneath the boughs, reading, talking, and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Ellie showed me a poem she'd written. "In the space between shadows and light, I found you waiting, soft and bright." I read it again and again, feeling the truth in every line. But love, even when soft and steady, isn't without its storms. There were days when the distance felt unbearable, when the memories of what was lost weighed heavy, when the silence between us stretched too wide. On those days, we held each other tighter, leaning into the pain with the hope that it would pass. One afternoon, I found Ellie staring out at the lake, her eyes distant. "I'm scared," she said, "scared that this won't last." I took her hand, steady and warm. "We're stronger than that," I said, "because we're choosing this every day." She smiled through tears. "Every day," she whispered. Summer began to wane, the first hints of autumn brushing the edges of the orchard with gold. We stood together beneath the trees, hands intertwined, ready to face whatever came next. Because love, the real kind, was about staying, even when it was hard, even when the future was uncertain. The days grew cooler as autumn whispered through Pine Brook. Leaves turned amber and gold, drifting lazily to the ground like memories falling softly into place. Ellie and I walked the orchard paths beneath the fading sun, the world around us settling into a slower rhythm, one that matched the quiet turning inside us. We'd come a long way, from distance to closeness, from fear to fragile hope. But endings and beginnings often wear the same face. We spent more time talking about what the future might hold. Not plans or promises, but possibilities. The small dreams we still held, tucked beneath the layers of everything we'd been through. Sometimes we sat by the lake, watching the surface ripple with the wind and let the silence speak. One evening, Ellie brought out her notebook again, the one she'd carried on her trip and filled with poems and sketches. She read to me a new poem, her voice soft and sure. The quiet turning of the seasons, like the slow unfolding of a story, where endings blend into beginnings, and love remains the thread that ties. I felt the weight and the lightness of those words settle deep in my chest. We knew the story we'd been living wasn't over, but it was changing, like the orchard shedding its leaves, readying for winter's rest. The town prepared for the harvest festival, a celebration of the year's growth and the promise of new seeds planted. Casey, Ellie, and I worked together to hang lanterns and prepare the feast. There was laughter, music, and a quiet joy that felt like a balm to our tired hearts. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Ellie and I walked hand in hand through the orchard. We didn't need to say much. The soft glow of lanterns lit our way. Our hearts spoke in the spaces between words. Love, I realized, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It was about the quiet turning of days, the small moments that stitch a story together, the courage to keep going, even when the path is uncertain. The chill of early autumn wrapped Pine Brook in a quiet embrace. The orchard stood tall and proud, leaves whispering secrets to the wind as they drifted downward. Ellie and I had learned to breathe in sync with this new season, measured and tender. The raw edges of the past had softened, replaced by something fragile and hopeful. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, we sat on the porch steps, shoulders brushing. "I don't know what's next," Ellie said, her voice a gentle murmur, "but I want to find out with you." I smiled, heart swelling with a quiet certainty. Me too. Days melted into nights, and with every shared smile and silence, our story grew deeper roots. We talked less about the future and more about now, about the sunlight on leaves, the hum of crickets, the taste of the first apples from the orchard. There was a peacefulness in simply being, and I clung to it like a lifeline. The harvest festival arrived in a swirl of colors and warmth. Lanterns lit the streets, their soft glow casting shadows that danced like memories. Casey joined us in laughter and song, her presence a steady reminder of friendship's gentle power. That night, as music floated through the air, Ellie and I stole away to the quiet orchard. Under a sky heavy with stars, she leaned into me, and I felt the world hold its breath. Time was no longer something to fear. It was a river carrying us forward, sometimes swift, sometimes slow, but always moving. Our love wasn't perfect. It was messy and slow and beautiful in its imperfections. As the season turned toward winter, I realized that endings weren't about closing doors, but opening them. With Ellie beside me, the horizon stretched soft and wide, full of possibility and quiet promise. The first frost came quietly, frosting the orchard in a delicate lace of silver. The air held a crispness that seemed to settle everything into a deep hush. Ellie and I moved through the days, wrapped in layers of warmth, blankets, whispered words, and the soft comfort of shared silences. We spent long evenings by the fireplace, reading old poems and tracing patterns in the wood's glowing embers. There was a sacredness to the quiet moments, like we were stitching ourselves together with threads of trust and hope. One afternoon, as the sky turned the soft gray of early winter, Ellie pulled out the notebook she'd carried with her all these months. She opened it to a page filled with fresh words, a poem short and simple. In the hush of falling leaves, in the stillness of fading light, love whispers promises that carry us through the night. She read it aloud, voice steady but tender. I felt the weight of those promises settle deep in my chest, soft and sure. The town's pace slowed with the season, the harvest festival, a fading memory as winter took hold. Snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing Pine Brook in white. Walking through the quiet streets one evening, Ellie and I held hands, the cold biting but softened by our closeness. "We've come far," she said. "We have," I agreed. "And no matter what comes next." Her voice trailed, but the meaning was clear. I squeezed her hand. "We face it together." The story wasn't about grand finales or perfect conclusions. It was about quiet promises made in the spaces between words, about choosing each other every day through all the seasons. As the snow settled and the nights grew long, I knew our story was still unfolding, soft, sow, and full of hope. Winter in Pine Brook was a quiet song, soft, steady, and comforting in its gentle rhythms. Ellie and I had found a new kind of peace in the stillness, a deep calm beneath the falling snow. We spent mornings by the window, watching the world turn white and listening to the hush that came with it. Sometimes Casey stopped by with fresh coffee and a warm smile, reminders that even in quiet times we were never alone. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Ellie and I sat close on the worn couch, hands entwined. She looked up at me, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I don't have all the answers," she said softly, "but I know I want to keep finding them with you." I smiled, heart full. "We don't need all the answers," I replied. "Just this, together." We talked about the future, not in plans or promises, but in possibilities. Of shared mornings, quiet walks, and soft evenings like this one. Of learning, growing, and choosing love again and again. The days were slow but full of small moments that mattered more than words. A glance across the room, a touch on the hand, the shared warmth of being near. As winter deepened, I realized that love was not a destination, but a journey. One we would walk step by step, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. The snow had softened the edges of Pine Brook, wrapping the town in a quiet stillness that felt like a promise. Ellie and I stood outside the little bookstore, hand in hand, watching the first light of dawn stretch across the sky. It was a beginning, not perfect, not certain, but real. We had learned to love in the spaces between fear and hope, in the silences and the whispered words. The journey had been slow, winding, and full of shadows and light. Inside, the shop smelled of old paper and fresh coffee, a comfort that felt like home. Casey bustled around, setting out warm blankets and candles, her laughter filling the room with light. Jordan stopped by with a stack of new books, smiling like he knew this was more than just a season ending. Ellie turned to me, eyes bright and steady. "Thank you for waiting." "For staying," I replied. We didn't need to say more. The love we had was a quiet one, soft, steady, and sure. A story that wasn't about grand endings, but about the beauty of every new day. As the morning sun rose higher, we stepped outside into the fresh air, ready to face whatever came next. Together,